Mark, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I know you're over there in sunny Beirut. I'm here in Maryland on the east coast of the US, just to orient you, not far from DC. And I'm just so excited to talk to you about your legendary winery. It has such a famed history. I'm excited for the conversation. Maybe you could start out. I know a lot of people are familiar with Chateau Musar, but maybe many are not. So maybe you could give us a little background on your family's winery and how you became a part of it.
Well, our family dates, at least the winery component of our family dates back to 1930. So that was when my grandfather, who was called Gaston at the time, started the winery. He relied or he basically delved into what was happening in the Phoenician times in Lebanon in terms of wine production. The Phoenicians, our ancestors going back to between 3,000 and 6,000 years ago, used to produce wines in the area. And when he went to France to study medicine, came back not really liking medicine, but really loving wine. He thought, okay, and this is probably a much better thing than being a doctor. I'll just produce wines and make people happy. And so he decided to start the winery. So that was in 1930. He actually even started selling a lot of the wines to the French army who was posted in Lebanon between the two world wars. Eventually, then my father and my uncle came in. So that's the second generation. We're talking late 50s. Early 60s. And at that point, my father became the winemaker. So that's Serge. And he did quite an important thing for us as a winery, which is that he took over from my grandfather, the winemaking, although he was young and basically had almost no experience in winemaking. But he had this approach of this philosophy that if the Phoenicians were making wines many, many thousands of years ago without additives, without treatment, without any technology, then, and they made it very successfully because this is how wine spread across the Mediterranean and eventually made it through to Europe. If they've done it, many thousands of years ago, let's try to do the same. And so, whereas in the 60s, the whole wine community was embracing new technologies, adding yeasts, adding components, membranes to control the wines, he went exactly the opposite way, which was we stopped using yeasts at the time. We stopped filtering our wines, our reds. We stopped fining them. And all of that led to what we called, or my father called, the non-interventionism in terms of winemaking, meaning the least possible impact and external influence on the wines, apart obviously from weather and making some choices like terroir, what to plant and what to blend, etc. And so, today people talk about natural winemaking, organic, maybe biodynamic, but that's been part of our DNA, since the 60s.
And your father studied in Bordeaux, correct?
So yeah, my father started at the winery in 59, not making the wines, but bottling and getting involved, and started making the wines 1 or 2 years later, studied in Bordeaux in 64, came back with a little bit of a Bordeaux twist in terms of how he was making the wines afterwards. And then in the 70s, decided, no, I want to go back to the way I was doing the wines before, as in before going to Bordeaux. So he used the knowledge he got, but used more of his perception, taste, and I guess local influence in terms of how he thought the wine should taste in Lebanon. And this is how we got to, I guess, the signature of Mizar that we still hold to today.
I love that. And yeah, you were way ahead of your time, right? Since natural wine seems to be like the hot topic today, and you've just been doing it all along, right? Now,
Absolutely.
explain where the winery is situated. And I know your vineyards are a distance away because of politics and how the countries were being
History.
drawn at that time. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Lebanon is a very tiny country. It's 120 miles long along the coastline on the Mediterranean Sea and 30 miles inland on average. But you have two chains of mountains to the east and the Bekaa Valley, which is at roughly 3,000 feet. Between these two chains of mountains that go up to 10,000 feet is really the breadbasket of Lebanon. And so this is where when my grandfather started, he thought, okay, we will plant there. We'll ask farmers. He didn't have any land himself, but he asked farmers to plant. But the winery he thought should be closer to home, to the Christian areas. We're Christian because the country was a new country in the 1930s. It was only 10 years old as it was born out of the end of the Turkish Empire at the end of World War I. So end of 1918. And so he decided, okay, let's put the winery in an area that we know. He actually started in an old convent or palace called the Musar Palace, which was owned by his cousin, a 400-year-old palace. And it's in the cellars of that palace that he really started at the beginning. And then as it grew, eventually he bought the house next door, which is where he built the further winery where we actually today have Chateau Musar. But the origin of the name Musar comes from that palace, the Musar Palace.
Love
and
it.
So what we do is we transport all the grapes from the vineyards to the winery. It's roughly a 3-hour truck drive.
Wow. That's a little bit of logistics in there that you have to figure out, I bet. And
Yes.
the grape varieties that you're using, specifically with the Chateau Musar white, are new ones for me that I have not heard that much about. So maybe we could start there, and then later we'll talk about your famed reds. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the two grapes you're using in your Musar white.
Yes, so very unusual varietals. Varietals that probably existed at the time of the Phoenicians. They are local to Lebanon, and they're called Obeide and Marwah. It's difficult to remember because you're not going to be exposed to these varietals outside of Lebanon and mostly outside of Musar. But they are amazing. They ripen very late. The alcohol levels goes up to 12 and a half, although they are harvested in October, which is extremely late for us. We're very warm and a country with a lot of sun. So low alcohol level, a lot of time on the cluster in the sun. So you end up with a lot of concentration. Very old vines. Some of the oldest ones we have are more than 100 years old on original roots. But the new ones that we've been planting in the Bekaa Valley floor, which is where our reds also are typically located, are now on American rootstock because there is phylloxera in that area. The very old vines that my grandfather used to source were in the mountains, even higher up, remote villages where phylloxera hadn't hit. And it creates wines because probably of this very old, this maturation process that's so slow on the vine, wines that are extremely intense, rich, elegant, and an amazing ability to age. So I think what you're tasting is the 18 vintage, which is current vintage for us. 18 is 7 years old. That's current vintage.
I know. I was going to say this is just so opposite of what I normally think about white wines, because typically we're told, drink your whites between 1 and 3 years or 1 and 5 years, but you're not even releasing these, that's 7 years ago now. So tell me a little bit about, is that if I tasted this 7 years ago, would we not love it, or why do we wait to release it?
It's a very good question. Well, it takes roughly 1 year for us to produce these wines and put them in a bottle. They're fermented in wood, stays in wood, on leases for 6 to 9 months, then blended and bottled. So it's relatively fast. But during their early phase, they tend to be wines that are a little bit austere, very tight. And that's the reason we typically wait. We could release it a little bit earlier, but you do realize what makes Musar is the ability of the wines to evolve in the glass. As you open your bottle, as you swirl your wine in the glass, it changes. And if you're drinking that wine too early on, the evolution is going to be slower, as in if you drink it after 2 years or 3 years. If you wait 7 years, which is what we do, or 6 years, let's say, you start to have a better evolution in the glass. If you wait for your bottle to age to 15, 20 years, as you open it, every bottle is a journey. You go from a starting point, which is maybe a little bit more introvert, more tight. And as it opens up, you start to see everything coming out. I mean, we're talking, depending on the vintage, flowers, rose petals, then eventually you get exotic fruits. That's when they're young. As they get older, you get dried fruits, nuts, apricot, honey, melon, honeydew. And then as they get much, much older, 20 years plus, then it really also you can get more sherry notes on it sometimes, and maybe whiskey notes. It's a permanent evolution. And this is why
and there's some herbal notes here as well, which are really, really lovely.
Absolutely.
I think in your tasting notes, you said oregano and pine, but definitely there is this variety. It's not just fruit bomb or all earth. You've got all these different components. And I love the idea of, you're making a huge investment in holding these wines till you feel they're ready to go, rather than releasing them into the market and kind of letting people decide, if they're going to wait or not. What's the effect on the winery, given that, I guess, you got to wait 7 years from your vintage to get it over to me here in the US?
Yeah, it takes time. So that means also money. It takes a commitment. I don't think it's something that's easy to do if you're starting a winery from scratch, because if you think of planting, you start to get grapes after 5 years. If you then make your wine after 5 years and then have to wait another 7 years to sell your first bottle, it means that between your first planting and your first bottle sale, you're talking 12 years. That's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to build it up over time. But we're lucky to have, almost 100 years of history now at Musar. And so we've gradually been able to figure out what is the right time to release our wines and build that into our, I guess, our workflow and our wine flow. So we have entry-level wines that are sold earlier, after 2 or 3 years, depending whether they're red, white, rosé. But the Chateau label, which is our top white, top red, and top rosé, is not aged as much. It could, but it's not aged as much. But the white and the red are sold after 7 years. And this is where we feel that they can start to show. For us, it's more important that the wines show well than we just sell them quickly. That's for us is not the important part. It's really the experience. This is what counts.
We're all about food and wine here in my house. I saw in another interview, you say wines can be a meditation. And I do get that when you have a truly excellent wine like this. But if you were going to incorporate this into a meal per se, what would be one of your favorite things?
So depends whether you're talking about a younger white, like the 18 vintage, or something which is 15 years older, or like 20-year-old. But if you're in the younger whites, you have some, I think any type of vegetables would be great. I think some fish, but you need a fish that's already has a bit of substance, because if it's too light, I think the wine will just probably overpower it. And so the balance will not be great. Dishes, maybe with nuts. Lamb will be actually amazing, but not, I mean, lamb is very versatile as a dish, because you can put it with our reds, because our reds also have this animalistic component to them. But you can also put them with white. It really depends on the sauce that you use. Like a completely grilled lamb, I would typically put with white. A lamb with a sauce and everything that's a bit more reddish in color would end up with a red pairing. And so this is how I would look at it. I'll tell you one of the most interesting pairings I've had with the white that was done actually with a 75 white. And at the time, that was probably 10 years ago. 75 now is 50 years old. It was a 40-year-old wine at the time. And it was a dry aged steak.
Wow.
Because
yes.
a 40-year-old white Musar has so much power, intensity. It was actually a bit too powerful for the steak, to be honest. Obviously, as soon as you put a red sauce, the white wines don't work. But on a pure grilled component, it was absolutely outstanding.
That's
All
excellent.
the earthiness, the mushrooms that come out of the wine were matching the dry aged steak perfectly. So
yeah, and there is a creaminess here. I know we didn't necessarily mention, but this does spend, I believe, like 9 months in French oak.
in French
so
oak, yes.
Yes.
And you have two varietals. So the Obeide is a little bit similar in style in terms of its characteristics to Chardonnay. So that's where the creaminess component might kick in. The Merloir is more similar to Semillon. And so sometimes our wines are compared to dry Sauternes, because that's Semillon. And so depending on the vintage of Musar, sometimes that Merloir component kicks in a bit more. And all of a sudden, it has hints of what you would expect from a white Sauterne. But sometimes, it's a chameleon, really a chameleon.
That's the whole idea of vintage, right? When you make vintage wines, each year is expressing same grapes, but different year, different weather, different conditions. And so I find that fun. It's not Coca-Cola. We don't want wine to taste the same way every single year. And so it's probably exciting and terrifying in the same breath, I guess, as a winemaker.
I think we view wine more like a philosophy of life, and it's part of the way people have been living here for 6,000 years. Life is not a copy paste or repeat every day of what you do. Life has good days, bad days. You wake up in the morning, sometimes you're, let's go and get it. The other day, you're just, a little bit more or less active. And it's the same with wine. And so repeating the same experience over and over is not what life is about. And this is not what we want to express in our wines. And so we're never looking for, I think, a copy-paste experience. And so we rely on weather. And even, by the way, if you take the same bottle of wine, or the same wine, and open it today in one environment, and then open it tomorrow in a different environment, even by changing temperature, person you're drinking it with, food, same bottle of Musar, you will be surprised, but you might have two completely different experiences. And this is the beauty, I think, about what we do. It's not for everybody's taste. People who drink champagne want to drink exactly the same thing every time, which, I mean, in most champagnes at least. But with our wines, what you get is a journey for every single bottle. Either you embrace it, or maybe this Musar is not for you. But for those who embrace it, they love it because they get that journey.
We kind of touched already on natural winemaking, that really your dad kind of started this winery with in mind, for the most part, to do it the natural way, the way it was done thousands of years ago. But of course, now there's many winemakers all over the world taking part in this movement called natural wine, and that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years. Are you involved in the natural wine movement? Are you like the head of the natural wine movement, or what are your thoughts on that?
Look, for us, and we're not the only ones who have embraced that approach, 50, 60, 70 years ago. There are many wineries around the world who have. I mean, it's really not just Musar. I think then it's a question of ability to reach the market and whether people learned about it through Musar or through another winery. And it could be through another winery. I think we try to be above trends and marketing. It's our identity. The white that you just tasted, I can tell you, when we launched it really in international markets in the East, were wines that were not understood. They were against the whole trend of what white wine was about at the time. And there was a lot of pushback. And we insisted, we thought, okay, this is the identity of these two grapes. This is the identity of Musar with these two grapes. And we want to make sure that people get it. And it took 20 more years. Eventually, now people really start to get them, and you have people who fall in love with our Chateau Musar white, and some people who, again, don't really like it. But it's really about creating that identity that's very strong. And so we don't surf a wave of marketing on natural winemaking. We have an approach which is what I call natural winemaking, but it's not what we put on the label or anything like that. We actually even fall in what I would call the classical wine category, because some natural wines tend to be a bit more funky. Our wines, although they're made in the natural way, taste like more classic, elegant, refined. I would call it the city rat versus the country rat. The country rat would be the natural wine movement, and maybe the city rat is more the one who's in the city. And we fall in between these two.
Yes, it is a beautiful wine, and I really appreciate being able to taste it when you think it's at its best. But also, I love the idea of seeing, we don't get to taste a lot of whites with age. Lots of people drink it fresh, and so it's exciting to see that you can find older vintages. And really, if you're a collector or somebody who loves to see the evolution, it sounds like this is a great place to do it.
You should. By the way, Laurie, on this, now that you've opened your bottle and you've tasted it, what I would recommend is that you close it. Don't put it in the fridge. Don't take out the air. Just put a regular cork and then taste it again. And then again, every day for the next month. And really taste it over a month. And then a month, you'll start to get the impression of what that wine could get to if it was aged 20 years. Because that evolution will happen with your bottle, just leaving it open over that period of time.
Okay, that's my homework.
Yes, exactly.
I will do that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about red wines. And the next one, I believe that you're in the order that we should taste, is the Jeune Red, which is released earlier than your other wines and really is meant for earlier drinking and maybe a younger market. And these days, at least in the US, all we talk about is Gen Z, which is, our 20-year-olds, and how do we get them to drink more wine? But tell me a little bit about this wine. I love the label, by the way. The Chateau Musar are very classic, but this is a little bit more of a modern twist to it. So tell me about this one.
Jeune Red was launched as as we had an entry-level wine, since the beginning. But the Jeune label and name, the label was a bit different than this one, but the name was launched roughly 20 years ago. And the idea was to try to bring in a Musar to a younger audience, a wine that is more accessible, understandable, less complex, that doesn't necessarily need age, and which is mostly focused on fruit, because this is a wine that doesn't go through oak aging at all, so that it remains on the fruit and fresh. And when you're a young drinker, you're looking initially for maybe a more funky label, and then also for flavor profile. that you recognize, and that's usually fruit. And so this particular wine is a blend of Cinsault, roughly 50%. That's the majority of the wines. And then the rest is Shiraz and a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. And the reason we put a lot of Cinsault in all of our wines, and in particular in the younger wines, is that it's the drinkability factor of our wines. Cinsault, it's what I would call the Pinot Noir of the South in terms of lighter body, lighter structure, more drinkable, less tannins, and it really brings in the ease and accessibility of the wines. So for a young drinker, for me, this is beautiful. Some of the older drinkers love our Jeune, but it's not really similar to the style of our top label, the Chateau label, which is a bit more complex and age-worthy.
Well, it smells very fresh. I know that this is aged in concrete. I did see that in your tasting notes. So you're not getting that oak influence here, if you will. But a lot of the French wines that I love are not aged in oak either. So it's not unusual to use this concrete method, is it?
Concrete is the oldest. No, the oldest would be probably amphoras. So we talk clay, maybe rocks in Georgia, but otherwise concrete is the oldest. And then eventually the world moved in the 60s to stainless steel. In our case, we use stainless steel for the younger Jeune White and Jeune Rosé because it's a very quick process before bottling. For the reds, the Jeune is at least a year and a half before it's bottled. And so we thought, in our experience, concrete allows to give you a little bit more complexity to the wines than stainless steel. It maybe takes away a little bit of freshness, but the complexity levels brings it up. And for us, complexity experience is much more important than pure freshness. But it's still a 2-year-old wine, 2.5-year-old wine. So that still has a lot of fruit in there.
Yeah, 22 vintage. I don't know if we mentioned that, but I love all the red fruit that's in there. But there's also a little bit of an earth note as well. It's not a fruit bomb by any imagination, but it's very smooth. It's just really elegant on the finish. And so it's you're not getting that tannic thing, which some people love, and it's great with your meats and all that, and maybe helps a wine age. But this is going to be a crowd pleaser, I guess, is in my mind, because people that maybe like a heavier wine or a lighter wine, this is kind of in the middle.
I think the Cabernet and the Syrah component give it a bit of the tannins that some people might enjoy. And the power, but the Cinsault really then mellows it down, and so it has a beautiful balance between the two. And this wine can age quite a bit. I've tasted some that are more than 10 years old because they're not aged in oak. They will not develop as well as our other more premium labels, but they would still start to show a bit more earth, which is a bit unusual. But the earth component is really what stands out at Musar in most of our wines as soon as you start to age them. To be honest, this is the part that we enjoy. The longer you can wait with Musar, the better it is for the wine. Whether you can store it and wait 5, 10, 15 years, depending on which wine, is not maybe everybody's desire. But this is actually the beautiful part of our wines. And because we hold a library of old vintages, you're able actually to buy the older vintages already aged from us rather than having to store them yourselves.
And curious, you call it Syrah, which in Australia is called Shiraz or Shiraz, as they say with their lovely accents, which in my studies is the city in Persia. I think maybe it's Iran where it's actually located, where they say that's the birthplace of wine or some of the earliest recordings. So is it just because you have a little bit more of a French flair to your chateau that you don't call it Shiraz? Or I'm just curious why it's in your neck of the woods, it's never called Shiraz.
Sure. Yeah. So it's Syrah because, in Lebanon, we speak Arabic. That's our, national language. But we also speak a lot of French and English. When you're at school, you actually learn the 3 languages. And the French were very influential in Lebanon, starting from Napoleon, helping basically support the Christians in the area who were part of the Ottoman Empire. And the French were quite often here to help support the Christians. So there's a big community that speaks French. At home, we speak French. And so for us, it was only natural when we went into wine to actually use the French names. And this is why I guess we're also a chateau and not something else. I guess that's the heritage that we've had of our French influence in Lebanon.
And I understand since the winery was started with your grandfather, you've made a wine in every single vintage except 1976, I believe is what I saw. And given there's a lot of things going on in your neck of the woods of the world, how do you kind of handle the challenges of things changing politically and militarily and everything else?
It's a good question. During the civil war in Lebanon, that was from 75 until 91, there's only 1 year, which is 76, where we couldn't produce. Prior to that, my father was still experimenting in some vintages. So we have some vintages that we did not produce, at least not at the Chateau level, Chateau being our top premium label. And then since then, we've had every vintage. 22, we had a problem at the winery, so that was not linked to war. So that vintage doesn't exist anymore. Otherwise, we always manage. Lebanon is maybe the phoenix that rises from the ashes. Our resilience here is something that you are born into. You don't have a choice. It's part of the region. It's part of living here and dealing with issues as they come up. So a lot of people ask me, how can you do it? And I say, everybody who's having to deal with a problem eventually finds a solution. And, each in his own way, suffering or not from it. But in the end, we've been a country invaded by so many different invaders over time that we got, I guess, used to it. And we just, learn to cope, to be resilient, and to just continue, which is what we've done for now 95 years. Although, as you say, we missed a few years, but not that many after that.
Resilience in a bottle. So
Exactly.
I think that's a perfect segue to the Chateau Musar Red, which is the third of the three wines I have here for us to discuss. I know this is a very special wine for you and for the winery and the family. So tell me your thoughts on this wine and a little bit about what you hope to express in the glass.
So this is our top label. This is the wine that my father really built the whole winery on in terms of flavor profile, ageability, elegance. This is our cheval de bataille, as we say in French. It's a blend of Cabernet, Carignan, and Cinsault, a third each. And I'm going to describe you a little bit how these three varietals build the wine. And I say build because we almost think of wine making as Lego. I mean, you use different varietals, different terroirs, different plots of land, different maturities and ages of vines to create the most complex and balanced wine you can. And within that wine, Cabernet Sauvignon is what I would call is the skeleton of our wine. It's, if you were to compare it to, let's say, to a human being, it's there, it's needed, but you don't want to look at bones. And so we hide our Cabernet. We wrap it with what I call the Carignan, which are the muscles. Carignan is really the varietal that holds the wine together and is the bridge between the three varietals. And Cinsault is the skin. It's really the silky, smooth, the thing you want to see. You don't want to see bones. You don't want to see muscles. You want to see skin. And in the end, it's Cinsault that gives this very round component to our wines. It makes it very drinkable when it's 8 years old, which is when it's released. But it also allows the wines to age very well. And Cinsault brings also a more earthy component much faster than Cabernet. So if you're on a pure 100% Cabernet, you need 20, 25, maybe 30 years to start to move to earth in terms of flavor profile. With Cinsault and Carignan, that switch starts at Musar between 12, 15, 18 years, depending on the vintage. And then at years 20, you really start to have fruit, what I call cooked fruit also, but also earth. And this is where the wines really start to be beautiful to drink because they go through so much evolution in the glass. When you have the ability to taste Musar as a 7-year-old wine and as a, let's say, 25-year-old wine in parallel, both, and you start to see the difference, it's going to be very difficult for you to, when you have the choice, to go back on to the younger wine. Some people might, but the majority would typically eventually figure out that the complexity, the layers, the elegance that you get as the wines get older, tend to push you into that direction. And that's
very elegant on the palate. I mean, amazing. Yes, there's tannins there, but these are velvety. These are really a silky finish to it, if that's how I would describe.
Yeah, accessible, easy. And that's really the component of the Cinsault that makes it so, gouléant. It flows, as we say in French. It just flows.
Nice. And of course, we could say, oh, of course, meat, because this is like a bigger red. But what would be your favorite pairing for this wine, for this younger version of this wine, I should
Yes,
say.
for the younger version. So here, because you have still a bit more fruit, I would go more like for tomato-based recipe. It could have meat as well, of course. Lamb, I wouldn't do with a vintage that's so young. Lamb and venison, I would go with something that's maybe 15, 20 years of age at Musar. But like a red meat, like a
Like a
steak.
bolognese.
Bolognese would be absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic with this. Absolutely. And so
Wonderful.
either very red meat, but like young meat, not venison, or anything that's tomato based will be absolutely outstanding with this one.
This is gorgeous. Did you
It's
always
long.
know? Oh, go ahead. It's young. I know.
It's
Hard to think of it as young. But
no,
because it's 7 years, but
yeah. No, but I also meant it's it's young, but it's also very long. I don't know, but once
long
you
finish.
with
Yes.
long finish, yeah, and
Yeah.
this is what surprises people quite a bit because you would expect that maybe with a blend of Cinsault and Carignan that are not what I would call noble varietals, you would expect that the finish would be shorter, but actually we have very low yields at Musar. We have organic vineyards. We have natural farming, absolutely nothing. Everything's done by hand. It's all bush vines. And so you end up with, because of these very low yields, with very intense flavors in our fruit in general. And obviously with grapes as well at the winery. And it's so I don't call it concentration. I call it intensity. Concentration gives you this that it's heavy, although it's very maybe
Yes, it's
powerful, but
not.
it's very heavy. At Musar, it's not. It's very intense, and that is really the beauty of the terroir that we have. That allows you to get this very long finish, very intense flavors, but it's almost ethereal still on the palate, which is it's a rare but beautiful combination.
Give us an idea of how many bottles or cases of these wines are actually produced, just to get, I know you're imported through Broadbent Selections, and that's how we got introduced. So you are here in the US, obviously in various markets, but are we the biggest market? How many of your wines are there to go around so people know how fast to get out there and buy them up?
Look, the US is now becoming one of our largest markets, but the US as a whole is one market and it's trailing Europe. Europe is roughly the same size in terms of population, but we've been closer to Europe. We had our own company in the UK selling to the whole of Europe. So it's still a bigger market there. But as a country, as a single country, the US is now the largest. And we sell all over the country. I spend actually more than a month and a half, sometimes 2 months a year, traveling around the country, doing tastings, wine dinners, events, talking to people. And it's usually I enjoy my trips to the US because people are into wine. They're really eager. They're curious. At least the people that I meet are always curious to taste different vintages, different varietals, different areas, and in our case, even different cultures. And it all allows to understand wine better. And usually, it's a winning combination when you have people like that who are into your wines. So you can find our wines everywhere in the US, basically. In most places.
Yes. Perfect. I know people are going to be inspired to want to get out there and try these vintages, but hopefully they can find older vintages.
If people wants to, if anybody wants to, reach out by email on our website, we'll then figure out where they live and what type of retailer close to them could have our wine. So it's really easy. Just reach out to us, and then we'll take it from there.
So, question: the Jeune Red, younger drinking, right? Why
Yes,
not a screw cap? Why a cork and not a screw cap?
It's a good question. And that probably covers what you asked me earlier, how much we produce. We produce 600,000 bottles in total, which is not small, but also not big. The winery was built in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. And so it wasn't planned for such a huge expansion. We only have space for one bottling line. And so we can't have both. And it doesn't, and even the numbers don't justify having both a screw cap and cork. But to be honest, we prefer cork. It's a natural product. It's not perfect, but at least it's something we know. Would we have put the Jeune in the screw cap if there was no issue of space and finances? And maybe, but I find that having the charm of opening a bottle and hearing the pop is part of the wine experience. And although it might be easier, more practical, more pragmatic to have screw caps, for me, it's part of life when you actually take your opener and then open a bottle.
I agree.
I mean, it's like if I told you, imagine you were opening a bottle of champagne and there was no pop. Now, I know that some sommeliers
Right.
like to really not hear the pop of the champagne, but for me, it's part of the experience. And that's what we also have, I guess, even with our younger wines.
Wow. Well, I have a question for you. There seem to
Yeah, of
be,
course.
at least here in the US, there's a lot of myths about wine that just aren't true. Like you have to, has to be expensive to be good. You have to have red wine with red meat, which you've already dispelled with your Chateau Musar and steak suggestion for us. But is there anything that you kind of hear when you're out and about visiting the US, Europe, wherever you're in the markets, that wine myth that you would like to dispel?
Well, there are lots. I'll start maybe with one. The first one is that the more you know about wine, and anybody who's starting to maybe study wine or even just, be curious about learning about wine, realizes that the more you know, the less you know. So it's just endless. That's the first part. And the second part, I think, is that when you meet somebody who says who knows everything, then you know that maybe that person may have studied, may have had a lot of experience, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that his experience is the one that you will have as a taster. So I tend to say that it's not a good wine is not necessarily an expensive wine, and it's not necessarily a wine that is recommended by somebody who's, let's say, more professional, because what he might like is not what you would like as a taster. Now, they might guide you in terms of the varietals, understanding what's in it, so that you then understand what you like, and then eventually you learn more, and eventually also your taste changes. And then you
Mm-hmm.
could move from a style of wine, a style of varietals to something else as you go through 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of wine experience. So I guess the comment I want to make when I'm saying all of this is that believe in what you like, what you think. Maybe hear what people outside of, in front of you have to say, but in the end, it's your own palate that decides. And then you go through your own journey of wine discovery. And like you go through university, like school, or meeting people, it's the same. It's the same with wine. It's a living thing, and it changes all the time, and it adapts to who you are as a living person as well.
I often say when I'm doing events or any kind of wine education that it's about trusting your own taste. And that's basically what you're saying. This has been amazing. And I know people are really going to be excited to hear all about your winery and get out there and try the wines. Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's really a pleasure, Laurie. Thank you very much for having me, and for a fantastic conversation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.